Welcome, foolish mortals, to Halloween Treats, presented by the Look Back Machine. For the entire month of October, we bring you 31 episodes on 31 flicks. So sit back and relax on your broomstick. We have blood-curdling boogeyman and sadistic serial killers. From castles to were-rabbits to spine-chilling spine-tinglers. Oh, but that's not all. It's only a bit. There's also Dahmer, Dracula, and Wallace and Gromit. So turn down the lights and turn up the sound. And ready your heart, for it's about to pound. Because there's Halloween film history abound. Happy Halloween from the Look Back Machine.
Think about Disney Halloween. Maybe the first thing that pops into your mind is Chernabog from Fantasia, or the Wicked Witch bearing fruit to Snow White. There have always been scary elements in Disney projects. But there are a few wholly devoted Halloween features. In fact, you can count them on one hand. This trend might date back to Walt Disney's first Halloween project in 1929, The Skeleton Dance, animated by Ub Iwerks and Disney himself. The short is Mickey Mouseless, and instead showcases a dancing group of skeletons. This silly symphony may be tame by modern standards, but it was not family-friendly in Denmark. The New York Times headline read, "Danes ban Mickey Mouse. Censor calls the film creation of Disney too macabre. The censor insists that the Danish public must not be allowed to see one of Mr. Disney's silly symphony films, which shows dancing skeletons and ghosts in a graveyard." And so for one of his following shorts, and perhaps to make it a little bit softer, Disney would add Mickey Mouse to the formula. That short was called Mickey's Haunted House. This cartoon also features the Skeleton Brigade, and it features a haunting cloaked figure. But their only desire is to have Mickey play piano for them, so that they can dance and be merry. The mere appearance of Mickey adds a lightness, comedy, and family friendliness to the dancing skeletons. And that's kind of what would happen with the rest of Disney's Halloween projects. You have to delicately balance terror and fun for the whole family. It's possibly the reason they avoid Halloween features. However, Disney's television presence has allowed it to experiment in the horror genre and create mini classics for those willing to look through the haunted forest. So for the next week, we will be diving into Disney's television library to discover where Disney's true spirit of Halloween resides. Welcome to the week of Disney Halloween. Welcome, everyone, to the week of Disney Halloween. Our first entry is 1986's Mr. Boogedy, which is Disney's first entry into horror television. The movie follows the Davis family as they unexpectedly move into a haunted house. Haunted by, you guessed it, Mr. Boogedy. With a relatively simple plot, the film has incredible staying power. Last year, when Disney Plus was launched, there was a hashtag Boogedy challenge, where the first thing you had to watch on Disney Plus was Mr. Boogedy to confuse their algorithms. This hashtag ended up trending. This is the story of Disney's Halloween flick that's still stuck in the public consciousness over 25 years later. Writer, Michael Janover.
You know, just 2 days ago, I got a residual for Boogedy. This is like 40 years ago, literally. I think I wrote Boogedy in here, it's right in front of me. 1985. 1985 was my first draft of Mr. Boogedy. It's got a genesis that goes back to film school, but I'll tell you briefly. And if you want to know more, I'll tell you. But I went to UCLA Film School and I wanted to be a director, which is absolutely the wrong thing for someone like me to do. But I didn't know at that time, or I was deluding myself. But anyway, one of the classes was what they call it, production film or design film. They called it design films. And basically you made a 1 or 2 minute movie. And just about the time, I made a couple. I made one where a guy is shaving, and then a skin diver comes out of his toilet and looks around and goes back down. It was just a visual gag. And then I had this idea about a vampire, a typical setup for a vampire, coming through that French window with the moonlight behind him and a beautiful woman lying in a four-poster bed. The first thing you do is you hear this guy wheezing, and then his hand comes in, another hand comes in, and this old guy drags himself into the room, and he barely can. He's so weak and old. He's on his last legs, and he makes it over to the bed. He leans over to bite her neck, which of course she offers to him, and his false teeth fall out. So that was the joke. That was a joke. Probably if I did it again, it would be when they fall on the bed, they are chattering teeth. But so years later, I had an agent by then, and my agent said, Cheech and Chong want to talk to you. It wasn't Cheech and Chong. It was actually their manager. And I said, really? Why? I said, I don't know. Go and find out. And so I did. I went down. They were at Columbia Studios. They said, so, the small talk. And they said, so you got any ideas? Ideas. I didn't come planned. I didn't come ready for this. But my mind works in strange ways, and it went right back to the vampire coming through the window. And so I said, well, here's something that I did was film school, and I told him what I just told you, and it got a laugh. It usually did. It got a laugh. And he said, great. He said, yeah, I suppose we could do. I thought I was writing. They were looking for something for Cheech and Chong. We could do something like Airplane, but for horror movies. Just do a spoof on horror movies. And so we did. We went about it. They hired me for Columbia Studios. And this script, I was just looking at it. Although I don't have the original script, but it was pretty out there. But it was funny. It was manic, but it was funny. It was like Saturday Night Live without the censors and on speed. It was just moving along, and everyone loved it, right? Then it got pulled, and this guy Howard, who was the manager, he'd already gone to the point where he was printing T-shirts for Cheap Thrills. So this was a go movie. And then the movie got killed. And I said, what happened? And he said, the head of the studio, he just didn't like one of the jokes. And I said, didn't like a joke? We could get rid of a joke. What's the big problem? Well, he's a really strong Catholic. I said, well, what does that mean? What's the problem? And the guy, and he shrugged. So I went back, and years later, I finally figured out what the joke must have been. And in this story, which is what Boogedy is based on, I have a family moving to a haunted house, and the father, who's crazy like the father in Boogedy, he gets possessed by a demon, just like because I was doing The Exorcist. I was taken off on The Exorcist. And in the movie The Exorcist, I forget what's her name, Reagan, little daughter, she talks about Captain Howdy. She brings up Captain Howdy once or twice in the, what's Captain Howdy? I hear Captain Howdy. Told you my mind is weird. I think Howdy Doody. You remember that? You're back old times. Howdy Doody's a puppet. And so I had the father get possessed in his ass. And his ass starts getting bigger. We see this a gradual transformation. It just gets bigger and bigger. This is going to be a funny visual gag. And then a face of Howdy Doody grows onto his ass, right? And then it starts talking. Like, if you remember Howdy Doody, maybe you remember the Buster Brown show with Froggy the Gremlin. Does that ring a bell at all?
Hiya, kids, hiya.
There's a little rubber frog that was, this guy, he would interrupt these guest speakers and disrupt their speeches. He would bounce around on the top of this grandfather clock and, hiya, kids, hiya. And I thought, that's the voice. That's the voice of this Captain Howdy. Hiya, kids, hiya. And so he's basically like the puppet master for Bud. His name was Bud in the script, ordering him around. So he's being ordered around by his butt, basically. Meanwhile, his wife has become a Stepford wife. I had to come up with these various exorcisms. What was I going to do to for a funny exorcism for this guy? He's possessed in his ass. Well, it's logical when you think about it. And so I have a scene where he's chasing him up and down the halls of this, like, what's it, an Amityville type of house. He's going running after him with an enema bag that's filled with holy water. Well, it's funny to me because it's a takeoff on the holy water thing, and it's a tradition in all. I started watching recently the whole series of Supernatural, and they're always pulling out the holy water. It's just it's a standard thing with getting rid of demons. So I was just doing a parody of that. The head of the studio is a staunch Catholic. I think he thought what I was doing was blasphemous, right? Like painting swastikas on a synagogue. And I thought, whoa, well, I can see why he feels the way he did. And if he really feels that way, I could see why he wanted nothing to do with me, because he was a straight no. So that was the end of that. And then I didn't realize it was this long, but 5 years later, I get a phone call from this woman, Maggie Field, who had become a friend. She was going to be an agent. She asked if she wanted to be my agent for a while, and I didn't want to leave the agent I was currently with. She had given up agenting for a while, and she had become an executive over at Disney. And she said, I came across this script that you did for Columbia, Cheap Thrills. You remember it? Yeah, I remember it. Do you think you could do that for Disney? And I thought, yeah, I could. Why not? And so I did on the basis of that. No, I really cut it way back. In fact, my first draft, I went too far, cleaning it up, and then I had to reinsert the wilder side of myself into it. It was hard at first because I was doing some of the wild stuff that I did in the original script for Cheap Thrills. That really didn't work. Like, I brought in a bunch of exorcists. This is crap. I got to focus on the family. So basically, by the second draft, I got it right. I got it right and focused on, and I came up with the kernel of the story, which is basically what the movie was about: this family moving into the haunted house, which is the same premise as Cheap Thrills.
Director Oz Scott.
Disney, I guess, reached out to me, and they basically hired me to do it. It was very interesting. Michael Janover, who wrote it, and I think we became very good friends, and we still talk today. But we did the first one, and then the second one, Disney let us produce it ourselves. I enjoyed it. I think the one thing that I think for myself is I don't like doing what I call just straight up stupid comedy. I want the characters to have something to them. And what I liked about the Boogedies was Mr. Boogedy was there was a haunted house. There were real people in there, and the kids were played, were straight, and they were real, and they were scared. And the father just knew how to just turn the horror into a joke. And so for me, I thought it was well written. We could do that campy, fun type of comedy, but there was something, there was still a reality to it. I will say that, and I will give props to one person who was working for Disney at the time, who I knew, and who knew me from Broadway, from theater, was Jane Rosenthal. And I found out, that she was one of the people who really, backed me on doing this. And remember, I did Busting Loose, too. So I had worked with Richard Pryor, so I had that young, comedy film experience. They let Michael Janover and I do, we pretty much had our free hand. They approved the script. And it was, they watched it, but no, they gave us tons of room. My big concern was in editing. I just remember always walking into, when I would show the cut, everything was too bright. And when I walked into the executives to show them the film on the monitors, I would bring in some ND paper. Do you know what ND paper is? ND paper is sort of like, think of putting sunglasses on. And I would take this ND 3 or 6 over their screen and say, okay, this is the way I want it to look. It's too bright now. It's too bright.
And I remember watching the first screening of it on TV at Oz's house, and there were a bunch of people there, a lot of kids, a lot of adults. And I noticed that both adults and kids were laughing. And I thought, well, that's cool. I got both. Because I'm an idiot. And my writing appeals across all ages, and partly a 7-year-old and partly old and wise. Boogedy is close to like Abbott Costello meets Frankenstein or something. It's that scary suspense, but even when you're a kid, it's Abbott Costello, and it's still the same thing. When you're looking at a family that the father sells practical jokes and they play practical jokes on one another, there's always that safety level that's always there, even at the scary moments. So you just have enough. And when little Ari goes after, this is one of the funniest moments in the movie that I did not write, but when it was because it would just happened when Ari is shooting the ping pong balls at Boogedy and they're bouncing off his chest. The visual was wonderful. It was very funny, and it wasn't scary. It was the humor undermined the suspense and scariness, but the scariness gave it an edge.
What I've heard is I had people come up to me and say, it was my first horror movie. It was a horror movie that my parents let me watch. And what I also said is, it was a movie that the parents did not mind sitting there watching with their kids.
Little kids, I found out that little kids, like under 4, they would get scared. But that's a pretty young age. Even with that, they still were watching, and they still got the humor. The other thing I discovered while I was living in, where Ojai is in California? Ever heard? We were living in Ojai for a while, and I was at the vet with my dog. This is shortly after Boogedy had come out, and as I'm leaving, I'm paying. The receptionist looks toward the doorway and says, "John, hi. This guy wrote Mr. Boogedy." And I thought, whoa. And I turned and looked, and this guy is wearing like the overalls, like he looked like he stepped right out of Deliverance, He was going to have me squealing like a pig. And he looked like, he glared at me, Mr. Boogedy. I love Mr. Boogedy. Okay. Then I knew. At that moment, I knew I had something special. That right there. I love Mr. Boogedy. So there you go. It cut across both adult and children, the humor, and it still does. It spawned the sequel because, what was the name of that guy who ran the studio back then, Disney? Michael, what's his name? Michael Eisner. He loved Boogedy. He was a huge fan. In fact, he started doing the intros for the Disney Sunday movie and he wanted to introduce, Mr. Boogedy. So he was a big fan. So they were on board.
Good evening. Excuse me, I'm just finishing up a little work. Welcome to the Disney Sunday movie. Now, I admit that tonight's feature, Mr. Boogedy, is a little weird. It's a family comedy all about ghosts, evil spirits, and a very haunted house. The guys in special effects department here at the studio knew I was introducing Mr. Boogedy, and this is their idea of a little joke. Very funny guys. Pyrotechnics, wonderful, really. Phone book, hot telephone call. Nobody has a magnifying. Okay, flying chair, great. I'm keeping my coffee. This is not funny. I just hope you figured out a way to get me back by next week. Good night, guys.
It was the first computers we started doing that second one on, and we had a modem. And I mean, we're talking prehistoric modem. And what I found really interesting is when you're sitting with a writer in a room, they can read, you read them, they read you. And I think there was a French philosopher, Le Bon, who talked about when two people in the same room together, the IQ in the room drops because you're trying to communicate and you're editing yourself and you're like this. What we did on that second one, my notes and his rewrites were coming over the computer. And I'm talking, you know, early. I mean, we were figuring out how to do that, you know, in the beginning. So I could just write anything, and I didn't have to think about what he thought about it. So I could sit there and say, this doesn't work, I do this, I do that, as opposed to him being in the room and having him look at me like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna say? I just could say it, and then he would just write me back. Our communication was very good on that score. Well, I mean, your mother gets kidnapped by a ghost and turned into the bride of Boogedy. I mean, it was light, but it was still a little horrible. You know, your mother gets lifted away and her hair so it was, I think it wasn't as much lighter. There was some other things involved in it. In the second one, I just remember I put David Faustino in a coffin, and I wrapped him in a shroud, and because I wanted it to be all things. I didn't want it to have any special effects when I didn't have to have special effects. And I got a coat hanger. I think I took the coat hanger and put a flashlight so it would shine up on his face and had him rise out of the coffin when the uncle came in. And I remember Michael Eisner telling everybody, when Disney does horror movies, let's hire Oz Scott. But that's he said, that's going just a little too far.
Tonight on the Disney Sunday Movie, America's funniest family meets the world's goofiest ghost. It's Mr. Boogedy.
He's not coming back.
He is back.
What's that bonehead up to now?
He's scaring up laughs trying to hunt down a bride.
You guys stay here and protect the women. This is war.
My father was floating down the hallway last night.
How exciting.
Get ready for spirited family fun.
Just kidding.
In an all-new comedy, The Bride of Boogedy.
This could be fun.
I'm in Mr. Boogedy's mansion with the Disney gang here to convince them once and for all there's no such thing as a ghost. Hello, I'm Michael Eisner, and welcome to the Disney Sunday Movie. I was trying to explain that Mr. Boogedy is just a character in a movie. He's make-believe. He's not a ghost. His so-called mysterious cape was made in the studio's costume department. He has no mystical powers.
Mr. Boogedy, man!
Yeah!
There is no Mr. Boogedy. This is ridiculous. The guys in the special effects department are at it again. Mickey, call my office.
Okay, Mike.
Hey, get me down from here. Goofy.
Yeah?
Call the auto club.
Gotcha, Michael.
Someone's got to get me down by next week.
Of course.
Good night, guys.
Good night, Michael.
Actually, we were supposed to go do a Leprechaun horror movie in Ireland that they were in. At the last minute, that fell through. But yeah, they were talking. But it was not going to be another Boogedy.
But no, we talked about it, but I never could come up with anything. We talked about doing a series that might take place in Lucifer Falls. I was thinking, what if I ever did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Boogedy? That might be funny. And I mentioned that yesterday to Oz. He says, yeah, you ought to do that. It's just, the ideas come and go. But yeah, that could work. That could work if they were interested. If I decided to pitch it, yeah.
Thanks for listening to Halloween Treats, presented by the Lookback Machine. Stay tuned for the entire month of October for an episode every single day till November.